Okay, good evening. Out of respect for everybody's time, I know we're all busy. We'll get started here. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Vanessa Bjortal. I'm the creator of tutorchess.com. TutorChess is a platform that connects parents with quality educators. Parents can register, find a tutor, schedule a tutor, and meet with a tutor all within minutes. Educators, you can create your own packages, set your own rates, and set your own calendar. One-on-one assistance for a child has never been more convenient or affordable. At TutorChess, we also offer resources, events, and webinars for all of our registered users. Tonight, joining us is Dr. Andrew Johnson. He's a professor of literacy, the author of 13 books and academic articles. He's also the host of the Reading Instruction podcast. So thank you, Dr. Johnson, for sharing your expertise with us.
Very good. Let me get set up here. And welcome to everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. To our Zoom world. This is the topic tonight: emotion, stress, and struggling readers. These are some big ideas I hope to get to tonight. And if you have questions, go ahead, type them in the chat function, and I'll be happy to address them as I can. So, get right to it. What happens when the fight or flight mechanism kicks in? There I am, a 60-year-old man, about ready to go over the edge. This is for charity thing. I'm standing on top of a 5-story building to raise money for the Literacy Center. And they're giving me instructions there, and I'm listening very carefully. And if you look close there, I'm about ready to cry because I'm so afraid of what's going to happen. I'm very afraid of heights. And she's explaining everything, but my brain is so flooded that I can't remember what they're saying. So I start to go down. You can see me breathing. My eyes restricted, focused. My muscles become tense. This is classic fight or flight mechanism. And you can see me up close there, not a pretty sight. As I started to go over the edge, I could not remember the instructions that they gave me. I was dangling 5 stories above the ground, screaming and swearing because I couldn't remember the basic instructions. That illustrates an extreme example of the fight or flight mechanism and what happens when we're under emotional stress. So I hope to help give you some ideas tonight and help you understand stress, emotions, and motivation. But first of all, beware of the number monkeys, those who try to enumerate your children, who try to describe your child simply in terms of numbers, and you'll see why. All the fancy graphs in the world, the complicated stuff, the percentiles, does not provide a true understanding of your child as a reader. So always take this stuff that you get from schools, official stuff, with a grain of salt. Numbers never get you to the true understanding of things. As an illustration, I was working with this young lady, and if I look just at the numerical data that was provided to me, I would have had a certain type of instruction. But I started talking with her father before I started working with this young lady, and he told me, well, she just needs a little more confidence. She doesn't want to be wrong. She feels bad if she doesn't get it right, just correct. So in talking with the father, I realized it was more a case of confidence. That got to me, it gave me an understanding that numbers would not have provided me. So schools often will give you a lot of numerical data. That's okay. But we have to learn to trust our own observations as teachers and trust the observation as parents and trust the observations of the teachers in the classroom. When I look at a lot of numerical data and I look at IEPs and a lot of tests and stuff, my question is, okay, so what do you do with all these numbers? Based on that numerical information, what exactly do I teach? What do I do with that information? Standardized tests are good, but they're a snapshot in time. They're not always accurate. They're not always valid. A teacher's observations stretch over time. A parent's observations stretch over time. And I've worked with enough children. I know the negative reaction, especially with struggling readers. When the bald guy comes with another test, you can see them just stiffen up because here's someone about ready to show me that I'm not a very good reader again. You can see that emotional negative reaction. Know that the publishing companies are there to make money. There's nothing wrong with that, but they're there for profit, not for people. And we must learn to trust the observations of parents and teachers. You know your child. Numerical data will not get to that place where you know your child. That classroom teacher is working with your child. That classroom teacher understands your child in a way that numbers can't. I'm not saying that standardized tests aren't important, aren't useful. They're one tool. We should not let them describe the whole child. Emotions, the topic of tonight's podcast, are important. They can't be measured, they can't be enumerated, but they do exist. And I think they are the most important thing, especially when you're working with struggling readers. So I want to give you some ideas today and help you understand. But know this, we think we emote with the same brain. It's silly to think that one would not affect the other, especially with young children who come to know the world mostly through their emotions. Positive emotional experiences enhance learning. Negative emotions disrupt learning. So attending to emotions, attending to our child's emotions, both at home and in school, can be considered a research-based strategy, not just some feel-good kind of thing. It is incredibly important. And as parents, you understand that. So the brain. First of all, everything we do as literacy instructors, as teachers, should be informed by how the brain learns, how the brain creates meaning with reality, how the brain creates meaning with print, and how the brain responds to emotions, the impact of emotions on cognition and on learning. First of all, starts with understanding what reading is, and you'll see why this is important. Reading is not simply sounding out words. Reading is creating meaning with print. One of the problems with struggling readers is they get a lot of sounding out word instruction. We think we'll just teach them how to sound out words, then we'll fix all their problems. So we spend a lot of time in sounding out word instruction, and guess what? That's not very fun. Nobody likes skill and drill. No one likes sounding out word instruction. Teachers don't like doing it. Kids don't like seeing it, being part of it, and it's not very effective. What is effective is reading lots of good books, talking about good books, engaged in meaning-based instruction. Not only is that fun, but it's more effective for all students at all ages. Now, struggling readers often struggle with letter-sound relationships. All fine, well, and good. So we tend to do more of what they can't do well, so they can't do well even more. Instead of focusing only on their deficit area, we need to focus, yes, on letter-sound relationships, but using their strengths to help them create meaning with print. Being a struggling sounder outer is different from being a struggling reader. By focusing only on sounding out word instruction, we create struggling readers because remember, they're not very good sounder outers in the first place. So we're focusing on what they can't do well. Focusing only on sounding out words tends to stymie their growth. Now again, it doesn't mean that we should not attend to phonics, letter sound, or relationships, but that should not be the only thing that we do with struggling readers. There's a difference between word recognition and word identification, and I'm helping you just understand the basics so you know what is and isn't going on in the classroom. Word recognition is different from word identification. Word recognition is when you see a word and you instantly know what it is. It's in your lexicon, your brain's dictionary. You see it, you recognize it automatically. You have the neural pathways developed. You don't have to sound it out. I see the word no and I recognize it instantly. That's word recognition. Word identification is when you see a word in print. It's in your dictionary in your head, but you need to use some strategy. You don't recognize it automatically. You have to use some strategy. Now, our brain uses 3 cueing systems to recognize words automatically while we're reading. We use semantics, which is the context of the sentence. We use syntax, which is grammar in word order. And we use phonics or phonological. And I'm going to teach you a couple strategies to help with word recognition in just a minute. But of these 3, as we're reading, as our brain is looking to recognize words, phonics is the least efficient because it takes up more space in short-term memory. An overemphasis on phonics can actually impede reading progress. Doesn't mean phonics should be taught. It should be one of 3 cueing systems that are developed, and it's one of 4 ways to identify words. And identifying words probably will be the topic of next month's webinar. We don't read letter by letter. No. That would take too long, too much space in working memory. When we read, we use minimal letter clues. Our eyes do not even stop and fixate on every word. Our brain fills in the blanks. Proof that there are 3 cueing systems. Take a minute, read the following 110 words as quickly as you can. All right, some of you may have finished. Now, do you think you can read this a second time just as fast? Read these same 110 words as quickly as you can. Ready? Go. And you're going, what is happening here? The same words, 110, but they're put in backwards order. You probably started reading them and you went very choppy. Oh wait, drove and car is in. Okay. Now, if reading were simply sounding out words, you would be able to read them the same. But it's not simply sounding out words because you use word order, grammar, punctuation, context, or meaning, all to help you create meaning with print. That is one of the 3 cueing systems. Notice how your eye movement changes. Read this paragraph. Notice how your eye movement kind of goes back and forth. Now take a look at this one. You notice your eyes kind of go like this, very choppy. That's what a struggling reader sounds like. And that's what happens when struggling readers focus only on letters, letter sounds, and not on context or grammar or word order. So, implications, you want to include activities that develop all 3 cueing systems. I'm going to show you just a couple tonight that you can use at home. You want to use authentic connected text to the greatest extent possible. When I'm teaching letter sounds, I want them not to look at words in isolation, but words in the context of the sentence. I want to pull up phonics activities from books they are reading. And I want to focus on creating meaning with print versus sounding out words. Reading is not sounding out words. Reading is creating meaning with print. So here are 4 strategies that you can use at home. Super secret strategies. The first one is a sentence strip. That's a sentence written on a strip of paper. Then you cut out individual words, you mix them up, and the child has to put them back in order. This works better for preschool up to grades, maybe 2, depending on the level. Now you can focus on letter patterns, meaning if I wanted to reinforce the short A or the at sound, I can have some of those words in there. So I can focus on syntax, grammar, and word order at the same time as reinforcing letter sounds. Now, if I'm a classroom teacher, I simply put these in an envelope and save them for another day. If I'm working at home, same thing. I put them in envelopes. Maybe at the end of the week, I get 3 or 4 out and we practice our word sorts together. We call them games, and young children like to play games. The sentence strip, very effective. By the way, you can create sentences out of books they're reading, out of a letter to grandma. You're limited only by your imagination. You can go online, you can get all sorts of commercial products, and you can make your own sentence mix-up. If you like to use PowerPoint, which I do because I can go through a lot of activities quickly, a form of this, and this is used to develop the semantic cueing system or the syntactic, and I'm reinforcing the short A sound here. And I simply provide a mixed up sentence, and I tell the child, tell me when you can recognize, when you know what the sentence is. And this is the sentence mix-up game. And usually by 2 or 3 words in, they can tell me what the sentence is. And eventually, depending, we teach the child to look at capital letter clues and period clues. This is sentence mix-up using PowerPoint. I like this because I can get through a lot quickly. If you want to do this at home using a computer, very easy to do. Do a Google search, sentence mix-up, sentence scramble, sentence jumble. There's a lot of sites and things that you can use there, a lot of free programs that you can use. The third strategy to use at home or at school to help in word identification, to develop context or the semantic cueing system, is called close, and that's the correct spelling. You give a sentence, meaning based, one of the words are missing or there's only the first letter. The child has to use the context of the sentence to figure out what the word is. Here's a classroom teacher doing it. She has sentences written on the board, and notice this one, she can peel off and show the child the first letter. She says, boys and girls, what word makes sense? And she's writing them down. I'll show you how you can do this in just a minute. And then they're seeing if their guess makes sense. They're looking for clues within the sentence. These recommend 3 to 6 minutes a day. Again, you're not teaching, you're developing the neural pathways, so they automatically begin to use the context of the sentence as they're reading. And you can use this to reinforce letter sound clues. For example, reinforcing the short A sound, she got blank and went home. What makes sense there? She got mad, yes. And afterwards, I'd say, do you see any or short A words here? And they'll go, mad, excellent. So I'm reinforcing the short A sound if you want. If you create these, when you're creating these, you want the target word to be abundantly obvious. You're teaching them to use clues. And I tell my students, I tutor kids, look for clues on both sides of the words. Don't stop. Don't stop. I'll get to that in just a minute. And this is a great one. Say blank and keep reading. I was working with a child this summer, and the child got to the word and stopped and started going letter by letter. And it took, I don't know, a minute or so for the child to finally figure out what the word was. I told the child, say blank and keep moving on. The child said blank, went down a couple words, and boop, popped back and instantly knew what the word was. That is using context clues. That's semantics, all right? It's quicker. They usually can find the word easier and faster if they just say blank and keep moving on. And when I'm reading aloud with a child, I reinforce that. Nice job, you are using clues, letter clues. And if I have a sentence like this, I tell the child, look for clues on both sides of the word. Now, as we're reading, our eyeballs don't go like this. Our eyeballs naturally go like this, back and forth as we're reading. That is mature reading behavior. So we want to teach our children, look for clues on both sides of the words if you don't recognize a word, if you don't know what a word is. And it's okay to say blank and keep moving, as long as they're creating meaning with print. Remember, reading is not sounding out words, it's creating meaning. So as long as they're creating meaning, get out of the way. Don't get in the way. Let them do it. All right. Those are 4 simple strategies. All right. Let's take a look at emotions just a little bit more. Remember that we think and we emote with the same brain, so we should attend to both of them. There are 6 basic human emotions. You can see them there: anger, fear, surprise, sadness, happy, and disgust. Emotions are a physiological response to an external stimuli. It enabled the evolution of our species. You're afraid, it's a physiological response. Your body does something. Emotions last for only about 15 seconds. If we dwell on them, of course, the emotions last longer. But the initial emotional response is a physiological response. It lasts only about 15 seconds. Now, this fear response is the one we are looking at today. Variations of fear: fear of failure, fear of looking stupid, fear of not being good enough. That is what our struggling readers feel. Stress, anxiety, nervousness, concern, tension. These are all related to that fear response. Our body has a natural response to fear. It's the fight or flight mechanism. We are hardwired not to get eaten, to either run or to turn and fight. Our body reacts in certain ways. As such, when children are feeling an emotion, you can't reason them out of that emotion. I was working with a child, and that child had a horrible day. The child was failing at reading, and the teacher made the child stay in at recess. That was the one thing the child looked forward to. So after school, a tutor session came. I was going to tutor the kid after school, and the child just shut down. No matter what I said, Billy, if you do this, then you can do that. The child was not going to respond. It wasn't until I said, Billy, what's going on? That's a great strategy, by the way. Ask your kid, what's going on? And just listen, and they'll often tell you. This happened at school. That made you feel kind of bad, didn't it? Yeah, it did. All right. Well, tonight, I'm not going to make you do that. We'll just, by the way, that's another strategy. A good teacher and a parent knows when to shut it down. If your kid is feeling frustrated, and you can tell, shut it down. It's not worth it building up this anger, this fight, this flight, this mechanism. It is not worth it. When I'm testing a child or doing a diagnostic, I'm looking at their nonverbals, and good teachers and parents look at the nonverbals, because that often tells us more than a test does. And you can tell when the child is shutting down, the child is feeling frustrated. And I shut it down immediately. Getting a diagnosis is not as important as that child's emotional well-being at that point. So what's going on? This fight or flight mechanism, all right, it prepares the organism. It's a physiological response. Often you get stomach aches, all right? That's that fight or flight. It's the body is getting the food out of the stomach. The blood is going away from the stomach to prepare the individual to either run or to fight. Blood is shunted away from the brain to the muscles. That's why when I was dangling 5 stories up above the ground, all the blood had been shunted from my prefrontal lobe, and I could not remember what that lady was telling me. And I couldn't remember how to work the lever. So I was screaming and swearing. Finally figured it out, how to get down. All right, same thing. And think about, I remember as a kid having to sing in church, and the stage fright, the shaky voice, all this stuff, flush skin, rapid heartbeat and breathing, all right, dilated pupils, trembling. Physiological responses to fear and anxiety are great for fighting, great for running, not so good for learning. That's why we must attend to them both at home and at school. You have less access to high-level functioning. Again, the blood is shunted away from the brain, so the rest of your parts of your body can act. That stress hormone that kicks in, cortisol, all right? And again, it impacts learning and retrieval of information. And long-term exposure to this is not good for the body as well. Here you see some of the fight or flight mechanisms. Tunnel vision, you saw that picture of me dangling up there. Fast breathing, tense muscles, and other stuff. Hand shaking, all right? As parents, you probably recognize that in your children. Oftentimes, that stress response, that child responding to stress, and again, remember the stress of failing, of looking stupid, anxiety, it's often mislabeled as ADHD or EBD or a learning disability, or the child is lazy or not motivated or immature. The child is motivated not to fail. That's what the child is not motivated to do. Not that the child is, and think about it, and I've had struggling readers who the teacher said that they were lazy. This was a sixth grader. I'm picturing the kid in my head. The classroom teacher said, oh, this kid is just lazy. Well, here's the thing. Homework assignment that it took most of the class 20 minutes to do took this severely struggling readers 2 hours to do the same thing. So who was the lazy one? All right. That child had to work with his or her mother 2 hours every night to do what took other students 20 minutes to do. That was a severely struggling reader. And a severely struggling reader, there are ways to adopt and adapt so you don't miss out conceptually. That's a subject for another webinar. So, strategies, what you can do at home and at school. Of course, never frustrate a kid or humiliate, never ever know when to shut it down. It's not worth frustrating or humiliating. Think about it, especially with reading. If they associate reading good books with frustration and humiliation, pretty soon they don't want to read good books because they associate that with bad things. Reading is good. It's great. It's fun. You want them to associate that with good things. Home needs to be a safe place. Home and school, a safe, nurturing place. And sometimes kids need to be kids. You know, we want to help our kids, and we sometimes think, well, if I just give my child more tutoring after school, they'll catch up. Sometimes more of something doesn't mean better, because that kid brain needs to shut down the school brain and be a kid for a while to relax so that the school brain can actually work better. They need to use that kid brain to be a kid versus that school brain all the time. So sometimes I will tell a parent, you know, I can work with your child, that's just fine. But they're doing some stuff at school. I think if I just add more stuff on top of that, it's going to create a splintered curriculum. And your child needs to be a child. More of something doesn't mean they're going to be further ahead. And by the way, here's another myth. Starting reading earlier does not mean they're going to be further ahead down the line. Starting reading in preschool and kindergarten, formalized phonics instruction, does not mean they're going to be further ahead down the line. Just means you're going to have a few more frustrated kids, winners and losers. Another topic. At home and at school, we should think of reading class as reading practice. Just like you practice playing the piano, practice playing baseball or tennis, you need to practice reading, and you need to practice books at their independent level or below. That means they can easily recognize about 97% or more of the words that they're reading. Independent level or below. As I said in my last webinar, when I go to the store, to the bookstore, I don't look for challenging books. I look for books I want to read. So choice is important as well for reading practice. And again, that's all related to emotion, enjoyment. If I'm able to choose the books I want to read, I'm more apt to read. Just like real people. When I go to the library, no one assigns me a book to read. I don't have to read stuff I'm not interested in. I get to choose. Now, sometimes choice is between this book or that book or within a category, but choice, some form of choice is important. Choice of whether to continue reading a book. If I'm not enjoying a book, I can go, I don't like this book, and I can put it down or click off my Kindle and find another book. All right. Children should know they have the same option. If you don't like a book, there are so many good books out there. Why continue reading a book that you don't like? Find one that you like. There's a whole bunch of them out there. And sometimes choice is of when to practice reading. Now, one of the best things you can do as a parent to help a struggling reading at home is find consistent time to practice reading. And whether it's 10 minutes a day, doesn't have to be long, but if it's consistent, just like practicing the piano, if you can practice for 10 minutes a day of focused time, that's much better than 40 minutes of unfocused time. So choice of when you want to practice reading. We're all going to read. Would you like to do it before supper or after supper? 10 minutes a day reading practice is incredibly important. Reassure your child. Now, as a parent, sometimes you get all worked up. And if you tell your child you're a struggling reader, and if you say to the teacher in front of the child, Billy is a struggling reader, what can I do? You're going to create a little bit more tension and anxiety. That kid is going to say, oh boy, something's wrong with me. I'm a struggling reader. Oh no. First thing I do when I work with a struggling reader, you're a struggling reader. Not a problem. A lot of people struggle with reading. I have things I'm not very good at. So we're going to see what we can do to help you. You're reassuring the child that it's okay to have things that you're not good at. And there are things we can do to help you get better. Trust is not given. Trust has to be earned. Trust is, you develop trust by, you're not going to make them feel stupid. You're not going to frustrate them or humiliate them. To establish relationships, I like to do a lot of writing activities, language experience, where I'm asking about what's going on in your life, and we write these together, establishing that relationship. And I don't ask them to do boring, meaningless stuff that they can't do. And this is more for teachers, but if they have to come to a classroom and they're going to be bored and do that stuff and they can't do it and they don't want to, all right. You want to earn their trust that at least you're going to have some fun. You don't have to have fun all the time, but neither do you have to be boring all the time. You want to find that nice, happy, sweet spot. Trust. And as parents too, we have to kind of earn that trust. Now, we're always looking for the program. If I would just find the program, I could buy it and I could use it at home, or they could use it at school. That will fix them. There are no magical programs, no super special one-size-fits-all programs. Absolutely not. They don't exist. There are only magic teachers with a variety of teaching strategies, and there's magic books that say, read me, that children want to read, that are wonderful. Children are not individualized products. What works for one may not work with the other. So oftentimes schools get snookered into thinking that they need to buy these expensive programs and that will fix all the struggling readers. So they take and try to ram all the kids through a similar program. But struggling readers are not all the same. They need different things. Individual approaches are needed for individual struggling readers. Struggling readers are not homogeneous products. They're all different. They all need different types of instruction or intervention or approaches for them. One size of instruction does not fit all. So, last thing I want to address tonight I drank a lot of coffee today, it's been quite a day, is motivation. Now, can you imagine a football coach getting the team all motivated before the big game and saying, all right, let's go out there and fail. Let's fail like we've never failed before. 1, 2, 3, fail, everybody. Would they be motivated? And a cheerleader saying, fail, team, fail. Fail, team. No, that doesn't happen. We usually say win. Value expectancy theory is a fancy way of helping us understand motivation. In any mathematical formula, a multiplication problem, if any one of these products is 0, the answer will be 0. Now in the motivation, value times expectancy equals motivation. If you value the activity and if you expect to succeed, you're motivated. If you have good stuff for them to read that they're interested in, you value reading. If you let them find and choose good books, a teacher's number one job is to help children fall in love with books. A parent's number one job, well, that's not your number one job, but that's an important thing as a parent. That means having a lot of good books around in the classroom library or taking trips to your community library when this COVID stuff gets all figured out. Lots of good books to read. You value it. It's fun. Reading is fun. You expect to succeed. You expect to be successful. Yes, I can do it. And part of what I do in my tutoring is to develop self-efficacy, and I have some strategies there. But even if you love reading, but you don't think you can do it, you're not going to be motivated. If you think you can do it, but it's just boring and not fun, you're not going to be motivated. So motivation is related to value times expectancy. That helps us understand motivation. So what, you say? Again, we have to help our children fall in love with books. Classroom teachers, that's probably one of the best things you can do. And we want to make sure when we're providing instruction or support, it occurs within the zone of proximal development. This is the level a child can do a task independently. This is the level that frustrates the child. If we get just a little ahead of where the child is at and provide a scaffold of some sort, that's the zone of proximal development. So when we're providing instruction or helping our child read or reading with our child, we want to provide just enough scaffolding so that they can do it independently so we don't frustrate the child. We never want to frustrate the child. Motivation and achievement are correlated. Correlation does not mean infer causation, but children who are more motivated achieve more, achieve higher. Students who achieve higher are more motivated. We know they go together somehow. We don't quite know the mix of things, but we do know that motivation is highly related to positive attitude and persistence. Meaning if you're motivated, you're more likely to continue a task, a harder task. You're less likely to give up. Positive attitude, again, is related to learning. So attending to emotions and motivation, these are research-based strategies, not just some feel-good sort of thing. These are important. These are how our brain learns. We emote and we think with the same brain. It is silly to think that you don't attend to emotions, especially with young children. But I'm 63. Attending to my emotions is important for me to learn and be motivated as well. Rewards. When I was beginning teaching back in the 80s, they had the Pizza Hut Bucket Club, where you got external rewards. Well, these are great, but whether you're working with a mouse in a Skinner box or a child reading a book, external rewards have little persistence, meaning as soon as that mouse pellet disappears, the behavior disappears. As soon as that bucket little reward disappears, the behavior disappears. External rewards have little persistence. In the classroom, it's recommended, if you do use rewards, link it to a literacy-related activity somehow. You get to choose the book we read, or you get to choose when we read. Internal reinforcers have greater persistence. Reading good books is rewarding in and of itself. We need to help our children discover that. Talking about good books is one of these things. Oh, I read a great book. I think you'll like it. Children rating books or talking with each other about good books. That's another way to help them discover what books they like. Internal reinforcers. Home and school. If you are, there's a place for, I like to reward, not achievement, but set a goal and meeting a goal. If you met your goal, we're going to celebrate that, some reward, and that's fine. But I recommend both at home and at school, link the reward to meeting a goal versus achievement. Recognize and set goals. That also means then you want to help, and goals are different. In the classroom or at home, one child will set one goal, and you can't have the same goals. You can't have the same expectations. If you have more than one child, they don't read all, they don't learn to speak all on the same schedule. Some sooner, some later, but they eventually figure it out. Same with all things. Human beings are not standardized products. We have to stop thinking we can standardize the approach to reading instruction. So find a goal that's just a little above where they're at so that they can easily meet their goal and celebrate that goal. It's okay to link a reward to that or a recognition. And if you are working with students in grades 4 and above, high-low books and High Noon Books publishes some of these. They're a little pricey, but if you can buy sets of these, I found they're just wonderful books. High-low books are high interest, low readability. So these are appropriate for students, I would say, in grades 4 to 8 or more, but they're written at the first and second grade level, all right? High interest, low readability. What you do not want to do with a student in grades 4 and above is have them practice reading what's called ducky books, children's books. I've made so many mistakes in my life, but I was tutoring a kid, he was in 5th grade, and he was reading at the first grade level. So I thought, okay, well, we'll practice reading something he could read. And I pulled out a Hello Kitty book. Yeah, we're going to practice reading this. And the look of horror on this kid's face, even though we're in a resource room, that someone would come in and see him reading this ducky book, this kitty book. Absolute horror. And I could read that nonverbal loud and clear. And that's when I realized, okay, I need to find some high-low books, or I need to start writing my own material that this kid can read. But high-low books. And that becomes, problematic, finding the right reading material, grades 4 and above. All right. This brings us to the end of this month's webinar. And did I have the chat function going here or questions? I can't figure this goofy thing out. Okay. If you have a question, do we have question and answers? Okay. Where do graphic novels fit in? Thank you. Okay, good. Graphic novels are wonderful. Comic books are wonderful. Anything that gets the child reading. Magazines are wonderful. Comic books, they're using picture clues, but eventually they're going to read the dialogue. So graphic novels and comic books are great. Yeah. Oh, a clue. I learned this the hard way too. Pre-read the graphic novels before you use them with kids, because some of them have more adult content, shall we say. So yeah, you always want to preview them, especially if you're going to use them in a school. Other questions that you might have? And I'm pausing here. Now, if you have a topic you'd like me to address, I'd like to do one of these every month because I think it's important that parents understand and teachers understand. Let's go on here. I think it's important that parents have the information that they need and teachers have the information that they need. You know, I work in a teacher education program. We do not create finished teaching products in 4 semesters of any teacher preparation program. Learning to be a master teacher happens over time. Professional development is incredibly important part of being a teacher. So if we really want to make our schools better, of course, we would fund them more, smaller class sizes, and more money for professional development for teachers. Okay, other questions? Okay, how about grade level vocabulary? That's a good one. The whole thing about grade level. Grade levels are an abstraction at best because a child's ability to read a text is dependent on, do they know the content? Are they familiar with the vocabulary, with the sentence structure? So it is a guesstimate, a rough guesstimate at best. So even though you get a grade equivalent score of 1.9, okay, it tells us maybe about first to second grade kind of stuff. But a child's ability to read a text is dependent on a lot of external variables. Grade level vocabulary, there is no grade level vocabulary. You know, the vocabulary is dependent on the type of words that the child is exposed to. And maybe attending vocabulary would be a great topic for another one. Do you have recommendations how to assess students to know if they're considered a struggling reader or if it's just normal? Well, yeah, I use it's called a qualitative reading inventory or a diagnostic reading inventory. But the best way to, and what you do, it's a type of miscue analysis, meaning that I listen to the child read and I record the child. And maybe I should do that next time webinar, all right? And then I play it back and I'm listening to the type of miscues the child is making so I can see what they're using to identify words. And that tells me what the reading problem is. If I want to know the approximate reading grade level, I would get a leveled text or graded text, have the child reads. And if they are reading 97% of the words or better, that's at their independent level. Okay, so graded readers give me a sense of the grade level. If I have a graded reader that's maybe graded at the 3rd grade level, and the child is reading 98% of the words without a problem, well, that's the independent level. That same level, a child is reading at the, maybe reading 90%, well, that's probably the instructional level. So if you're reading 3rd grade level text at the independent level, and you're a 3rd grader, that's good. If you're a 6th grader, that's not quite so good. So the best way to determine if the child is a struggling reader, and that's a term that is open to interpretation, is have the child read some authentic text, get a sense of the grade level, and get a sense of the number of word identification errors. You know, you can give all the tests in the world, and most of these tests have children reading individual words out of context, which is not a very valid assessment at all, because in the real world, we rarely read a word out of context. We always see it in the context of a sentence, a sign, or a package somehow. So those are not very valid assessments. What you want to do is get them to read authentic text. And that's a real short, rambly answer. And that probably takes a whole webinar in and of itself. With COVID in class library, how do we handle the paper books? COVID in class, as far as worrying about COVID infection, I'm an old literacy professor. That's probably outside my lane. I'll just tell you what I use when I'm tutoring. And I found COVID, I don't want to say COVID helped me tutor, but Since COVID started, I started doing all my tutoring online. So I'm able to tutor a kid up in Minneapolis, and I have a kid out in California and different parts of the United States. I love it. I use online books, Reading A to Z. Reading A to Z has a lot of books at varying levels. They're not as interesting as paper books, but they'll do. They'll do. So I hope I answered that question. I'll wait here to see if I have any other questions here. I want to make sure I get to all these questions. Okay. Where can I learn more teaching strategies like strips? I've got a YouTube channel. I got a podcast. I got a bunch of books out there. My books are very teacher friendly. I have 2 of them up on the screen right now. Designing Meaning-Based Interventions and 10 Essentials. These are chocked full of teacher strategies that parents can easily understand. And again, you send me an email of the types of things you'd like to learn, and I've committed to being here once a month. All right. So send me those questions. For little kids, KN1, that are very hard on this. All right. What do you do with that? And that's the kid I'm working with right now, a first grader. And I make sure that what we practice reading is at the independent level. I ask the child, do you want to read it together? Do you want to read it by yourself? All right. And reassuring that kid is so incredibly important. All right. Stressed and crying. And if they don't want to do it, shut it down. When I'm working with the child that I'm working with, I say, how many books do you want to try to read tonight? So we usually end the session by reading 3 or 4 books. And I always say, do you want to read another book? Are you ready to shut it down? As a parent, you can do that. Do you want to read another book? Are you ready to shut it down for tonight? Okay, you want to shut it down? Not a problem. And again, I'd rather have 10 minutes of good focused instruction than 20 minutes of frustrated, unfocused stuff. How do we push without frustrating them more? How do we push the child without trying to frustrate? The thing is, you don't push the child. The brain, you learn to read very much like you learn to speak. You didn't have to push your child to learn how to speak. You immersed the child in authentic speaking and listening context. So literacy, learning how to read, is you want the child to write letters and emails to grandma, read good books, but you don't want to push the child with excessive boring school worksheets when they already know the material. Boy, I don't know the answer to that. The question was, how do you address the difficulty children have with accessing boring school worksheets when they already know the material? How do I say this? Oftentimes, school districts feel compelled to do a certain thing because they bought this expensive new reading program and they think they need to get through all the material. A reading class should be 70 to 80% reading practice and 20 to 30% skills instruction. However, sadly, it's just the other way around. We think, once you get your work done, then you can read a good book. Reading a good book should be the work of reading instruction. That's how you become a better reader. We want our children, we're not preparing them to fill out worksheets. We're preparing them to read and understand books, to talk about books, to use writing to express their ideas. Instruction should reflect reality. These worksheets, a worksheet is a tool, and a tool's effectiveness is dependent on how it's used. Worksheets can be very valuable, but if that's all you're doing, if they're used inappropriate, they get in the way. Where does biography books fit in? My son likes reading about realistic things. He's a 2nd grader. Whatever the kid likes to read. If your kids love to read about dinosaurs, get dinosaur books. All right? It doesn't matter what the child is reading, as long as the child is reading. That's how the child becomes a better reader. Now, starting in grade 4, that informational textbooks become more important. So we do begin to teach the child how to read a textbook. but you read informational books differently than you read storybooks. You don't read a textbook the same way as you read a Harry Potter book. So we need to teach those two things differently. And comprehension is severely undertaught or mistaught in most classroom schools.